Hello guys, let's study about fetal circulation. Before beginning with it, let's study about the basics of fetal circulation using this diagram. So first, as we know, the fetus receives its oxygen from the placenta and not from the lungs. In adults, we receive oxygen from the lungs, whereas a fetus receives oxygen from the placenta. So after oxygenation, the blood from the placenta is passing here through this umbilical vein. So this umbilical vein, in case of fetus, carries oxygenated blood, which I've denoted with red lines. So here the oxygenated blood passes via the umbilical veins and goes into the portal vein. Very few amount of blood passes through the liver, and most of the blood is shunted from the portal vein directly into the inferior vena cava by a connection which is known as ductus venosus, which is present only in the fetal circulation and not in the adult circulation. So this oxygenated blood, as you can see here, is now going into the inferior vena cava, and via this inferior vena cava it reaches the right atrium. Apart from this oxygenated blood, there's also a deoxygenated blood which is from the lower extremities and the kidneys, which will be received by the inferior vena cava. So this is denoted by blue. So both this oxygenated and deoxygenated blood will reach the right atrium. Also, the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the upper extremities via the superior vena cava. So both from the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava, the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood and also oxygenated blood from the inferior vena cava. So the right atrium now has both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Most of the oxygenated blood will pass into the left atrium, that is selective shunting of the oxygenated blood via the foramen ovale, which is a connection between the right atrium and the left atrium. So, after passing into the left atrium, the blood will now reach the left ventricle. So, this blood is mostly the oxygenated blood which is reaching the left ventricle. So, from the left atrium, it reaches the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle, it passes into the aorta. From the aorta, the ascending aorta, it is delivered into the upper extremities of the fetus, such as the head, the upper limbs. It will be distributed into the upper extremities, this oxygenated blood. Now we'll see where this deoxygenated blood goes into. So the deoxygenated blood in the right atrium will now reach the right ventricle. So this blood is not entirely deoxygenated but mostly deoxygenated blood. So from the right ventricle, the blood reaches the pulmonary artery. From the pulmonary artery, normally in adult circulation, the blood will go into the lungs for oxygenation. But since the fetus lungs are collapsed and the pulmonary pressure is high, therefore the blood, most of the blood will be shunted from the pulmonary artery into the descending aorta via the duct with a shunt which is known as the ductus arteriosus. So now, after reaching the aorta, the blood, this deoxygenated blood from the descending aorta will move into the umbilical artery, and from the umbilical artery, it will go again to the placenta for oxygenation. So this is the basics of fetal circulation. Now let's look at it in brief. The fetus is dependent on the placental circulation. Oxygenated blood from the placenta is returned by umbilical vein to join the portal vein. As I've already discussed, it will join the portal vein. So ductus venosus, it is a low resistance pass between the portal vein and the inferior vena cava. So ductus venosus will pass from the portal vein to the inferior vena cava. Most of the blood will shunt. Only a small proportion of blood will mix with the portal venous blood and pass through the liver, because we know that the liver is not much functional. So very small amount of blood will pass through the liver. Most of the blood will be shunted into the inferior vena cava. Inferior vena cava will comprise blood from the umbilical vein, which is the oxygenated blood, and also from the lower extremities and the kidneys, which is the deoxygenated blood. So from this, it will now enter the right atrium. From the right atrium, one third of the blood will enter the left atrium through the foramen ovale, which is mostly the oxygenated blood, whereas two-third of blood along with two-thirds of blood from the superior vena cava, also from the superior vena cava, will enter into the right ventricle. So now we'll discuss about what happens with the oxygenated blood. So from the left atrium, it will pass into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle, it will go into the it will go into the ascending aorta, and from the ascending aorta it will be distributed to the coronaries, head and upper extremities. This deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle will be pumped into the pulmonary trunk. After being pumped into pulmonary trunk, very small amount of blood will enter into the pulmonary circulation, as we know, because the fetus lungs are not working properly. The rest will pass through the ductus arteriosus into the descending aorta, and then into the umbilical artery, which will deliver the blood into the placenta for oxygenation. Now we'll look at the differences between fetal circulation and the placental circulation, between the placental and fetal circulation. So, presence of placental circulation will be seen in case of fetus. There'll be collapsed lungs in case of fetus. So, there'll be absence of gas exchange in the lungs. There's presence of patent ductus venosus, presence of patent ductus arteriosus, and open foramen ovale in case of fetus when compared to the adult circulation. So, this is the difference between the adult circulation and the fetal circulation. Thank you.